Hi and welcome back to the next video of the real-time chat app series with NestJS and Angular. This is video 3, where we will make our own authentication module in NestJS. That is basically there to provide everything with JWT creation, JWT guards, and also we do some refactoring, so we move all the bcrypt, so password hashing, password comparing related stuff also to the authentication module, so that we separate everything a bit better if we want to use it later also in other modules too. So here we also have our normal video structure. So first we have like a look at the video outcome, then we read our user story for the outcome, we implement it then and close it. So let's have a quick look at the outcome of this video here. So you can see we are still able to create our users. So when we give them here like a new user or a new email, then we create a new user. Then we have our get endpoint where we get all the users. If we don't provide now a JWT token that is valid, you see we get like in response that we are unauthorized and that we are not able to access this endpoint or to get data from it. So what we need is we need to log in, and then we get in response a JWT token or login response with the token type, and the expires in time. And then we need to copy and paste this token. And for example, you can see it here in JWT.io. You can see we have like our user payload data, the issued at time, the expired time, and so on. And then if you add this token to your requests, you can now access all the users that we created. Also, we refactored some stuff in our application. So we have now a new authentication module where we have all the stuff for JWT and bcrypt with password hashing and so on, so that we can later use this also in other modules. Hi, so let's have a quick look at our story here for the third video. So you can see if we open this in a preview mode, we have our story here. As a developer, I want to have the security for at the moment bcrypt and all the JWT stuff in a separate authentication module. All security stuff should be in a separate module so that we can import it later to every module where we need it, for example, not just in our user module, but also in a message module, whatever we have what we need. And we also want to generate a JWT on login. So because right now we are just returning a Boolean true or false. And now we want to create a JWT on login if everything is successful. So if you have the right email and the right password. And then we want to be able to also secure routes with a JWT guard, so that checks before you can access the route or get a response if first you provided a JWT, and second if this JWT is also valid. So if it's not expired and so on. So the acceptance criteria are we want to have like a new authentication module. All bcrypt stuff that we now have in our user service should move to the authentication module, of course. Then we want to be able to generate a JWT with user payload. So then we want to have a guard that checks for valid JWT, and we want to attach this guard to our route where we can get all the users at the moment paginated. We want to protect this by our then JWT authentication guard. So let's just go right into it. So first we can start everything up from the last time. So simple docker compose up, and now it starts our frontend, also our NestJS API. And now we can go to Postman, just so that we remember everything that we have. Give it a second to start. And then you can see here the last request that I made to log in was where we will get in return a true, so a Boolean value. And here, of course, we want to have like a JWT and so on. So this is like the first request. Then here we get all our users in return that are at the moment created. And this should be protected by a JWT guard. And here we are creating users. There, I think nothing should change for this video. So we can now stop this. So before we really start, we can first have a quick look what are JSON Web Tokens. So we can just go over this article here. So they are an open standard for securely transmitting information between parties as a JSON object. It is readable, compact, and digitally signed using a private or public key, so that the integrity and authenticity of the token can be verified by other parties involved, so that if our backend later is creating this JWT, and then all the requests that we get from our front end, except the create or login requests, we want to have protected by some guards, and they will always check if there's a valid JWT, so that we can make sure that the user says who he is, that he actually is the user, so that we have more security. And you can see here, JWT exists or consists of 3 parts: header.payload.signature. So we have a header, a payload, and a signature. That is like you can see it here. This would be like the first part of the header. Then we would have the payload, and then we have the signature. This all is then encoded. And if we have decoded here, you see this here is then decoded the algorithm and the type, so JWT. We have then here the payload part, so sub, whom the token refers to, so the subject. This could be like the ID, the email, whatever we want later, the name, and the issued at, so when it was created. And you could also add when it is going to expire, and this here is the signature. So this is also able to be created easily with NestJS. So here's like a whole documentation page. And so to start, we first have to install some packages. So we of course need, I think, these all. So we have to cd into our API folder. We can install all these. And we also can install the passport-jwt package. And this should give us some stuff that we can use very easily. So when we have installed all this, we can also open here our folder. We have at the moment just our user module. So right now we also want to create like a new authentication module. So we say nest generate, so we use the nest CLI. And we want to generate a module, and we name this module Auth, so for authentication. And then you can see we have here our new authentication module. At the moment this is empty, and here we will later add all the stuff that we need. So then we can, in our authentication module, so we can cd into it. And now we can also nest generate service auth and create an authentication service where we can handle all our bcrypt stuff, where we, for example, hash a password. And we can also do everything JWT related. So basically we just created JWT. And that we have the same structure. So we also make here a service folder like we have in our user module. And then we can add some or 2 folders. The first one is strategies, and the second one is guards. So in this video, we are just going to make a JWT authentication guard, but in later videos, you can also make a guard who is able, for example, to access the chat room and so on. So there's like a lot of stuff that we can do. So here we have our authentication service. And the first thing that we can do is we can make here a constructor. And we can inject here JWT service. And this is, I think, coming from NestJS JWT. And I think we did not install this. So because this is needed if we want to authenticate username, password, return it JWT and so on. So we have to install this also. And then we should be able to import our JWT service. So now we can try, and you see now we can simply get it here. And then the first two functions that we want to have are the ones that we're using in our user service. That is once hashing a password, and the second one is validating the password. So this and this here, so we can actually move them together, so beneath each other, so that we find them easier. And now we can move them to our authentication service. So we can now say here we want to hash the password. We have like an input that is a string, and we return an observable that is also a string, so the hash. And then we can say just return from, we get a string back, and we can use bcrypt like we did here. So we can just remove it here because we don't need it here anymore. We want now to use it here, and we can say bcrypt dot, how is it, hash, I think. And then we give him the password and the salt rounds. And we have to import from. And the second one is compare passwords. And here we can copy and paste a bit, I think. This makes it a bit faster. So we are comparing them. So the password that the user is providing against the stored hash password from the database. And here we can also just return this here. And then we can access it here very easily. So we have just to inject the authentication service. So we can name it authentication service, authentication, or is it out service? Out service. So let's name it out service. And then we can just replace this here with this.out service .hash password, and we give him the password and nothing else changes. And the same goes here. Here we also say out service, and we just say compare passwords. And then everything is fine. So for this to work in our authentication module, we have to add our authentication service to our providers. So here we have our authentication, our auth service, and then we have to import our authentication module into our user module. And I think we also have to export our auth service so that we can use it in other modules. So, and another very important thing is we can also look this up now in our documentation from NestJS. that we have to register our JWT module. So we have to register this here and then in our authentication module, and we have to make sure that we provide a secret. So a secret key that is being used to sign the JWT, like we looked here earlier. And for example, we have some signing options where we can say this should be expired in 60 seconds and so on. So here we can just say we have the imports for our authentication module. And here we have our JWT module, and we want to register this async so that we can use environment variables. And we can have here another imports, for example, our config module, and we have to inject our config service. And then we can make a simple factory async and use our config service, config service. And then we can very simply provide the secret. So then we can call our config service that we injected and get our JWT secret. And we need to create this first here in our Docker Compose file. So we can say here JWT secret, and we could name this, for example, hard to guess secret 123. Of course, normally this should be a little bit more complicated. And then we just get this as string, and we can also add some signing options. And for example, say here expires in, and then we can specify it for 10,000 seconds. Then we can format it a bit, and then we have our authentication service. And for everything here to work, or that we want to use this, we can set a strategy. So we can use a JWT strategy. We can just have a look into it here. So the JWT strategy is there to extract the JWT from the request. We can say if we want to ignore the expiration date or time, and against which secret this should be validated. So here we also need the config service to get our secret, and then this will validate everything. So we can have here a little bit read. We can now address our final requirement, protecting endpoints by requiring a valid JWT present on the request. And Passport can help us here. It provides Passport JWT strategy. So this is this here. For securing RESTful endpoints with JSON Web Tokens. And so we can create this file, and we can simply add this code. And we can probably modify it a bit for us. So we can just say jwt.strategy.ts. And of course, we don't want to use a constant here. But we can, let's make it here a new line. We can give him here our config service. And then we can use our config service.get, my mistake, JWT secret. And of course, for the validation, we don't want to have our user ID and username, but we can just make it payload.user, because when we create it, we will have our payload with user, and then we return just our user. So we strip it away. So I think, what is this here? We don't need this. And then we can also have like a custom JWT authentication guard, or let's just read through it. So with the JWT strategy, we have like a passport strategy, and we configured it here. So you can see it here. First, we verify the JWT signature and decode the JSON, and then they call the validate function or method, and then they like attach this stuff here. So in our case, the user to it, so that we can, for example, then later do something like check the roles of the user or get the user by ID from our database, and then check if he is belonging to a group or whatever we want to do. Here, so this is like, we really need this. And so then what we want to do is like do an authentication or a JWT guard. So we can just search for this here. So this is like the basic implementation. So we can, with this, add like a protected route. And that is like basic authentication guard that's already available, that we can then just path with use guards. And this will just check if there's a valid JWT attached to the request. So later we can also make then another guard, for example, that checks for a role. And then this should also work. Because then it's always the first stuff that is being done is always it checks first with the strategy this here, then it adds like the payload from the user to it, and then the guard will come in. And so here we just check for the JWT, so this is like the basic guard. And then later we can also add like a role guard, and so in one of the next videos where we need it. Then we have in our service, we have our authentication source. We are just at the moment hashing passwords or comparing passwords, but we also want to be able to generate a JWT. So we can call our method here, generate JWT. And then we want to return an observable because JWT is just a string. And we always want to have an input for user, because the payload should always be the user at the moment. So here we can then very easily say we want to return this from the JWT service dot sign async, and then here we just give him the user, and this will, since it's in our authentication module, this gets configured with the secret, with the signing options, and then in the service, when we call this is already, the service already filled up, let's say, with this stuff that we made here. So right now we have also imported this into our user module. So now we can switch our service, so our login, because at the moment for our login controller we are just returning here like a Boolean value, but actually we don't want to return a Boolean value, but we want to return a JWT. So in our user service we have here our login stuff, and then first we check if the email already exists, or if the user exists, we find him by email. Then if we found the user, we validate the password, and we do this also now in our authentication service here. So we compare the password from the user against the stored password hash from the database that we got before. if the passwords matches, so if we get a true in return, then we get our user from the database again, because we don't want to have the password property with it. And now at the moment we are mapping it to true, so that we return a boolean, but we don't want to do this anymore. We now want to generate JWT and return this. So to do this is now very easily, because we already have those stuff in our Auth service because we just made it. So we can make here a simple switch map. We get our, we can call it payload. So this is our user that we got from the database. And then we can just call our authentication service and generate a JWT and give him the payload. And then we don't want to return a boolean anymore, but we are returning a string. Because we now return like the whole JWT, which is just a long string. So we can now remove our comment here. And we can probably, let's let it named login. And then we have also to change our controller. So for login, because right now this obviously fails. And now we get here in return, and we can check this and map the string that we get. So we get our JWT here, which is from type string. And then we have to create a response, and this should not be anymore from type boolean, but we want to return like a whole object. So we could, for example, name this login response.interface.ts, and we could export an interface. So we say export interface login response interface, and then we have like our access token. This is our JWT, so this is the string. We have the token type, which is also JWT, and we have we can set, for example, an expires in time, so then we just say 10,000 seconds, and we can also make this number or string, whatever we want. And then we can say we want to return login response interface here, and then we have to create it, of course. So we say we want to create a login response from type login response interface, and we return this here. And then we need our access token. This is our JWT that we get back from here. We get our token type. This is obviously JWT. And we can set our expires in, and this was, I think, 10,000 seconds. Now we have to look what is going wrong here. Type observable unknown is not assignable to type observable in response. Just give me a moment. So first we map this. Then we have our user. We go against our login service. Okay, no, it's still wrong. Oh, it's not assignable to type of server login response. But we have it. Or am I completely wrong? Semicolon. So when we go into our user service, we get in return our string. We generate our JWT. Find one, switch map, payload user, authentication service, generate JWT, our payload. I'm not seeing it right now. Did I misspell something? Let's just type it quickly again. This.user_helper_service. Then we want to create our login user DTO from our entity from login user DTO. So we give him our login user DTO. We pipe the outcome. We make a switch map. User. I know what the mistake is. I don't know why, but it often is not recognizing the map correctly. You see map is missing, so I think if we add map to the imports, this should work fine. So now we return like our login response. And what we could also do is we could now use here our JWT authentication guard. So we can do this like exactly in the documentation here. So we can make use guards, use our JWT authentication guard, and just annotate our endpoint with it. So we can say use guards, and just get here our JWT authentication guard. And I think here we can also shorten this, so we can return it directly. What is it saying? Yes. So then we can return it directly, and here I think, yeah, nothing, everything is fine. So I think we would be able, or can try to start it. So we can say, first we go to our, and call docker compose build, and then we can call docker compose up and see if we get a JWT or our login response when we try to log in, if we can only access the authenticate or the find all endpoint when we have a valid JWT. And yeah, let's see. So I think this here also not needed. Let's see, everything good. So now we can call docker compose up. Let's wait a bit. And then we can also copy and paste our JWT token and have a look at it here. So let's see. So our stuff here is starting. Let's see if everything works without a fail error. So this seems quite good. So NestJS is starting correctly. So now we can have a look if we can access, for example, our get all users endpoint. And now you see internal server error. So we have an unknown authentication strategy JWT. Why is this unknown? I'm sorry, I did not provide the guard and the strategy in my providers, so I have to import them. So we need the JWT strategy and the JWT Auth guard here, and then this rebuilds, and we can try again. And now you see, if I try to access this endpoint, what was possible before, we get a 401 unauthorized because we are not having a JWT. I can still access the other endpoints, so you can see it here. This endpoint has a guard, but our create endpoint is not having a guard, of course. But I can access it here still. And if I type a new email, then I can create another user. And now if I try to log in, for example, with my thomas3.com user and the correct password, this returns me my login response. So we have here our JWT token. We can also copy and paste this into JWT.io. And you see we have an algorithm, we have our type, we have our payload data, so the user with my ID, my username and my email, my issued at the timestamp, so and the experience, so 10 plus 10,000 seconds. And here, so if I now have this here, and now I make this request here, you see without JWT, no way to get there. But if I provide them here, a bearer token, and copy and paste this in here, and make another send, you see in return I get my normal response. So I can stop this here, can close, I think, nearly everything. And now we can check the story. So we now have our new authentication module. We moved all the bcrypt stuff to the authentication module, to our authentication service. We generate a JWT with user payload when we try to log in. We have now a guard that can check for a valid JWT, so our JWT authentication guard. And we protect it with the JWT Auth guard, our get all users endpoint. So this is like done now. So now we can commit all our changes. So we say git add upper A, git commit -m, and now we have like video 3. Added Auth module, moved everything with bcrypt and JWT to the Auth module. Added JWT creation and also JWT Auth guard. You can say git push.